Hey guys, welcome to Wrenchin. My name's Ben, and today I am finally back to wrenching on my 94 Chevy K1500. My truck's in really good shape for being 32 years old. It's got less than 100,000 miles, but I've had this truck for 2 years and the AC has never worked. So today I'm going to be replacing some AC parts like the compressor, the accumulator, and the orifice tube. I'll show you how I diagnosed it up to this point, and then we'll get those parts swapped out and hopefully get some ice cold AC in the truck. So if I turn my AC on full blast, I can see that the air coming out of the vents is no colder than it is outside. But what's interesting is my compressor is actually engaging the clutch. So I know the compressor is at least working, but the pressure on both sides is pretty low, especially the high side. So what that means is this compressor really just isn't doing much. In its defense, it is 32 years old. Good job, Chevy, for making a compressor that'll last that long. But I think it's finally time to replace it. A few things I changed out first that are easy and cheap. I changed the high and low side pressure switches. Those are both cheap and it might fix your problem. But the fact that it's charged with refrigerant and the compressor is running, but it's still not cold, leads me to believe that the compressor just isn't doing its job. So I'll change that out, and while I have the system open, I'm going to change out the accumulator as well as the orifice tube. Those are a good idea anytime you've got the system open. I'll have to evacuate the refrigerant out of the system first. I could do that by attaching a valve, opening up these ports and releasing it, but that's illegal, so I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is take it to a professional who can evacuate it properly. So I'm going to go ahead and get this evacuated by a professional. And with the system professionally evacuated, I can depress these Schrader valves on the low and the high side and see that there is no refrigerant in the system, so it's good to open up and work on. So I'm going to start with the accumulator just because it's probably going to be the easiest to take off. I'll unplug this pressure switch connector. I am going to reuse this because I know it's pretty new. And I'll start with this fitting on the front. It's a 32 millimeter, and I don't have a 32 millimeter wrench, so I'm going to use my adjustable pliers. There we go. All right, that wasn't too bad. This is aluminum, so you want to be a little careful with it. And I'll set that aside for now. From there, this should just rotate off the back, but I've got this bracket holding it on. I'll take that off and I can reuse that. And mine's got this foam cover on it. I'm hoping I can save that. It's nice that it comes in two pieces. And with that off, there's a screw on the bracket on the other side. And that is a 10 millimeter screw. So I'll loosen that up and get this out of the bracket. And with that out, this bracket comes off this way. And this back fitting on the accumulator is a 28 millimeter. So I can use two sets of adjustable pliers and break this loose. It looks like the back one's a 28 millimeter and this front one's a 32. So it might be a better idea to get those wrenches, but I got it off with these. So now that I can spin this fitting off, I'm just going to take it off and get the accumulator out of the bracket. So I'm going to be careful with these threads because they're aluminum and I don't want to have to replace the other side of this. But once I've got this out, the accumulator will come right off. All right, there we go. That's loose. Pull the accumulator off the port and I can slide it out of the bracket. All right, and with that off, I can go ahead and take the compressor out. The new one looks the same as the old one, so we're good there. The reason I'm going to go ahead and remove the compressor is I need to see how much oil was in the system. If I need to put a lot in, I could put some in the accumulator before I put it back in. But the only way to know is to get the compressor out and drain the oil out of it and see how much we get. I'll start by taking the belt off. The tensioner's got a 15 millimeter bolt right here. I'll loosen that slowly, and then I can put the same 15 millimeter socket on the bolt on the pulley for the belt. Loosen the belt up and take it off the compressor. I'll try to leave it on everything else, that way I don't have to take it all the way off. Next, I'll take these electrical connectors off the top. This one's got two tabs on the sides that you just pull out. And it's got a blue dust boot, so I'll remember that one goes on the front. This one on the back's got a push tab. I'll just push that and pull it out. And we'll see if the new compressor has that switch in it. Hopefully we don't have to reuse that one. That is the only switch I didn't replace, so it's possible that that could be causing a problem. I think the 30-year-old compressor is a better candidate right now, but we'll find out. So there are two mounting bolts on the sides. There's a nut on the back of this one and a nut on the front of this one. So I'll spin those out and then we'll get this out. First, I need to take the lines off the back side. It's got a bolt right in the center of it, and oddly enough, this 15 millimeter socket fits on that too. And I wanted to avoid taking off the air box, but that's gonna make removing this a lot easier, so I'm gonna take that out real quick. It's not hard to remove and it'll make it a little easier on me. And it's also a good time to check your air filter and see that you definitely need a new one. And my TBI could sure use a rebuilding. I may have to do that at some point. But now I've got a lot more room to work with, so I'm gonna use a deep 15 millimeter socket and loosen this bolt up. And it wasn't very tight, so we'll have to remember that when we get it back on. That thing is caked in anti-seize, and it actually doesn't look too bad, so it looks like somebody's been in here recently. I guess it's possible this is not the original compressor, but I really just kind of assumed it was. These nuts on the front and the back of the compressor are 14 millimeters. It looks like the heads of the bolts are the same size. So I'll get a 14 millimeter wrench on the back side of it, and my deep socket won't get on here straight because of the pulley. So I can use a short 14 millimeter socket, and since it's half drive, I can use a 3/8 to half adapter to give me a little more space. And that lets me get in here and loosen up this nut. All right, and there's one nut, and I can push the bolt through the backside. It's got some anti-seize on it too, so somebody definitely was in here. And I appreciate that they used anti-seize when they were in here. So I'll do the same thing with the other side. I'll use a deep socket for the nut in the back. So I got the nut off, I'll get the bolt through. I can spin the nut back on just a few threads. And there we go, I got it past the pulley. That bolt is longer, so I'll need to make sure to keep those separate. But at that point, the compressor is out. There is one more spot for a bolt right here. Mine was missing. I'm glad they didn't put that back in because that made it a lot easier to take out. Hopefully you do not have a bolt here at the bottom because that would be a nightmare to take out. So with the compressor out, I'll go ahead and check out the new parts. We'll compare them to the old ones and then get the new compressor in. So I will say that's probably the easiest AC compressor I've ever taken out. And my compressor came with a whole kit, new accumulator, new orifice tube. It even came with this old expansion valve, I assume is for older trucks, and a whole kit of O-rings and seals. So I'll link this kit in the description. So comparing these side by side, they do look really similar. The biggest difference I notice is the end of the pulley does not have this lip like the old one does. That's probably going to be okay because the pulley is the same size. It looks a little different on the back side, but the mounting bolt holes are in the same location. The port for the sensor just has a plug, so I'm going to have to remove that sensor and get it in here. I should have got a new one, so I'll link one of those in the description too, so you can replace yours while you got all this apart. It does have a snap ring in it, so I'll need to get some snap ring pliers to take that out. So the first thing I'll do is drain the oil out of the old compressor and see how much is in there. My kit did come with a measuring cup, which is nice. And I'm not getting a drop of oil, so I think that was the problem. I read that the new compressor should have 2 ounces of oil in it, so I'm going to drain this out and see how much oil is in it. And this should be vacuum sealed, so I should hear a pop when I pull this out. There we go. The new one does have some oil in it, which is good news. So I'll drain that out and we'll see how much is in it. So it did have about 3.5 ounces of oil. I am going to get rid of this because I'm not sure if it's PAG oil or not. So since I drained 3.5 ounces out of that compressor, I'm going to go ahead and add the same amount of PAG oil back into it. So I'll measure out 3.5 ounces. I'll pour that back in here, and hopefully that's the right amount. It is interesting that my old compressor had 0 oil in it. Even when I turn the pulley, no oil comes out. So this could possibly still be good. It just needed oil. I am going to hold on to this just in case. I'm actually going to put this plug back into it and hope that I can hold on to this and maybe save it or reuse it at some point. I will go ahead and remove this sensor. I found my snap ring pliers, so that's good news. So I will use these to remove this snap ring. There we go. Got it out. This is the high pressure cutoff switch, so it really just makes it so if the pressure gets too high, then it cuts off the compressor. A new one's 30 bucks. I will link it in the description, but I'm just gonna go ahead and reuse my old one. But I can use these to take this snap ring out of this plug in the new compressor. I'll link a good set of snap ring pliers in the description so you don't have to use junk ones like these. So I'll struggle with this for 20 more minutes and then eventually I'll get it out. All right, since I got one of them out, I'm just gonna pry it out the rest of the way and hope it doesn't hit me in the face. There we go. All right, and 20 minutes later, I finally got it out. So I can pop this plug out. There is a new O-ring in there and it's already oiled up, so I'm not gonna replace that. I'll just pop that in there and attempt to get this snap ring back in. All right, and that went in a lot easier than it came out. And I heard 2 snaps, so I think we're good. I can move that around in there and see that it is seated properly. So everything looks good there. I don't think there's any other seals that I need to replace on this compressor. So I'm gonna go ahead and install it. So before I install the new compressor, I want to replace seals, any of them that I find. The first 2 are on these lines that go into the compressor. So I'll take both of these off, keeping in mind that one is larger than the other. The larger one goes on the low side port and the smaller one goes on the high side port. And my new kit came with all kinds of different seals and O-rings. I'm going to replace the ones that I took off with the exact same ones in my kit. I'll put some PAG oil in the cap and then get some of that on these before I put them on. You really can't use too much. So I'll get these oiled up. I'll put the small one on this side and the bigger one goes on this side. And then any other seals that I see throughout this process, I'm going to replace those too. I can't imagine I'm going to use all of these O-rings and seals, but some of these these are for different cars that these compressors go to. So I think they just kind of send you everything and hope that at least what you need is in there. So I think at this point I'm good to put the compressor in and then get all this hooked up. I will spin the pulley a few times to circulate some of that oil, and then I'll just drop this right into place. It is just a little bit of a tight fit, so I'm going to see if I can hammer in some of these fittings. I'll try to put a pry bar on them and see if I can hammer them back. Yeah, those are moving. So I'll scoot them back as much as I can. And hopefully that'll give me the room I need to get this compressor in here. So I'll try to install this again and see if it's any better. There we go. And now I can turn it pretty freely, so I should be able to get the bolts through. We'll go ahead and push this into the ports and then get the bolts started. I'll have to use the new bolt for these lines because the threads are different than my old compressor. I'll push these in as far as I can and get the bolts started. And so I'll just snug this down slowly and make sure those fittings line up with the ports. And then I can snug it down once I get the compressor mounted. And I will put this bolt back in the front since the pulley on this one isn't as wide as the other compressor. And that way the extra length of this bolt is sticking out in the back rather than the front. So I'll snug that down, but I won't tighten it down all the way yet so I can get this one lined up. And I'll feed it in from the back since that's the way it was originally. And I can lift it up to get this bolt past these lines, line it up through the compressor, and push it all the way through. And so I'll get that one snugged all the way down, and I'll snug this one down too. And then I'll switch back to the 15mm socket and get these ports snugged down. I don't want to go too tight on this, but I do want to make sure it seals good. I'll get these connectors plugged back in. The round one goes to the high pressure switch in the back, and the blue one goes for the clutch up here. These have tabs on them, so they only go one way. And that snapped really good, so I feel good about that. Everything there looks good, so I think we got the new compressor installed without a problem. At this point, I can go ahead and get the belt back on. I'll just release the tension on the tensioner, get the belt back up around the compressor. I'll release the tension slowly and make sure that it's still around all the pulleys the way that it's supposed to be. And then I can go ahead and lock this bolt back down. So now I'll go ahead and install the accumulator. I'll take this low pressure switch off the old one and transport it over to the new one. The new one's already got an O-ring on it, but I'll just put a little bit of oil on it. And then I can just thread this sensor on, and I'll tighten it down just a little bit. The first thing here is I have two O-rings right here on these ports. Those go for both of these fittings here. So I'll find the one that looks closest and oil it up. That snapped into place, so that feels good. And this one's a little thinner, so these are two different O-rings. So I'll get that one on and slide it into place. Make sure it's got some oil on it. So I know this port's gonna go this way, so it's gonna go in there just like this. And as I take this cap off, it's starting to hiss a little bit, so that's good. That means it's under pressure, or vacuum, I guess. And it did come with some O-rings on the cap, so I guess I could have used those there. And I am gonna put about 2 ounces of oil in the accumulator before I install it. Hopefully that's not too much, but it should be good. So with the top cover on, I think I need to put the bottom cover in after I get it in the bracket. So I'm gonna try that. I'll slide this into the bracket and line up the back port. And I've got the back port threaded on by hand, so now I can go ahead and install the front port. That side had a plug in it that I took out with a pick. So then I'll just thread this port on. I'm gonna push in on the pipe while I thread this on. That way that O-ring seats nicely. I will put a little bit of oil on them so it's easier to thread on. And it looks like this clip just held on the cover. So I'll get this back around here, make sure the cover lines up. And that feels like it's about as good as it's gonna get, so I'll go ahead and close it down. And then I can go ahead and get this screw back in the bracket. Can't really see what I'm doing, but I hope I'm in there. All right, and there we go. Now I just need to get these fittings tightened down. Hopefully I can do this slowly without marring them up too bad. And again, I'm just using 2 sets of adjustable pliers. All right, and that feels pretty good. And I'll do the same with this one here. That one was pretty easy. I'll snap this electrical connector back on. And with that, I'm done with the accumulator and I can move on to the orifice tube. To get to the orifice tube, I'll have to take the grill off. I've done that in a previous video where I changed out these headlights, so I will link that in the description. So I'll go ahead and take the grill off and then I'll show you where the orifice tube is. grill off, I do want to point out that when I took this light off, I noticed that the fitting where the orifice tube is directly behind this bottom headlight. So I imagine you could get it out without taking the whole grill off. I went ahead and did it anyway because I don't know how I would get a wrench on there to loosen up that coupler. But this right here is where the orifice tube lives. I'll just need to loosen this up, open it up, and I can reach down in there with a set of tweezers or something. Before I do that though, I did think ahead a little bit and I got some coil cleaner. I can use this to clean up this condenser, clean some of these bugs and junk out of here, and hopefully it'll work a little better. And that looks pretty good. I thought it would work better than it did. There is still a lot of junk in there, so I'm kind of writing this stuff off as snake oil. Hopefully that'll give me a little bit colder air. So I can go ahead and get this fitting off and take the orifice tube out. This one's 24 millimeters if you're paying attention to the size of all these. I do have a 24 millimeter wrench, but I'm still just going to use these adjustable pliers because they've worked for everything else. So I'll loosen this up enough to get it off by hand. I will replace this O-ring. So to my absolute surprise, there is no orifice tube in there. I took a small pick and felt down in there to see if there were any pieces of it. When I didn't feel anything, I took the new orifice tube and slid it in here, and it goes all the way in and actually seats down pretty well. So I'm confident that because I had anti-seize on the bolts for the compressor, at some point the compressor got changed out. I would imagine they took out the orifice tube and just forgot to put it back in. That would explain the pressures that I was having, because with no orifice tube it can't generate a pressure differential between the low side and the high side. And at this point I'm even skeptical if that old compressor wasn't just in need of oil and an orifice tube. So I've already got the new compressor installed. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in there. Whatever PAG oil I have left, I'm going to dump into my old compressor, put the plugs into it, and then I can save it because these things are not cheap. This whole kit was pretty cheap, but if that's a factory compressor, I definitely want to hold on to it, especially if it might work. So I will go ahead and put some oil on the O-ring of this orifice tube. I'll put a little bit on the plastic housing. I'll go ahead and slide it down in here, and then I'll also go ahead and change out this O-ring while I'm in here. I'll add some oil to the new O-ring, slide that on here, and then I'll go ahead and thread this back on. And I'm confident that with the missing orifice tube, that was the cause of the problem on this AC system. And once I pull a vacuum and charge it, we should have cold AC. So I'm really excited to find the problem. It's too bad what happened to it. Like I said, I think that old compressor probably still works. But at this point, I've already got a new one, so I'm in good shape. So there we go, that's tight. I'm gonna leave it just like that. At this point, I've changed out all the parts that I wanted to, so I just need to get the grill back on. I'll pull a vacuum on the system. Once that's good, I can go ahead and charge the refrigerant, and then we can see how cold the AC gets. So I'll go ahead and get the grill back on. All right, and with the grill back on, we can go ahead and pull a vacuum and then charge the refrigerant. I need to pull a vacuum just to make sure there's no leaks, so I'll hook up my manifold gauges to the high and low ports. And I went ahead and opened the fittings on these ports for the Schrader valves. I can see that I have zero pressure in my system, and so now I can use a vacuum pump to pull a vacuum on the system. I just want to make sure this is in a steady spot because it's going to be on for quite a while. These aren't super cheap, but I have had this one for probably at least 10 years. I think I got it at Harbor Freight, and I could stand to get a new one, but it's still working, so I'm going to use it. I'll attach the yellow line on my manifold gauge set to the vacuum pump. Make sure that's tight. These fittings are tight as well. So I'll start by turning on the vacuum pump. I'll release this valve, and then as I open these, it should pull a vacuum on the system. And I should see this get down as close to -30 as it can. Now, like I said, my vacuum pump's old, so it probably will only get down to about 25. So I'll wait for this to get down to about -25 or 30. And this thing does get pretty hot, so I'm gonna put it up on some cardboard. So that looks pretty good. It's down to about -25, so I'm gonna go ahead and close these valves real quick. And I can turn my pump off. And I'll wait just a little bit and see if it drops. That way I can tell if there are any major leaks in the system. All right, and after about 20 minutes, there is no change here, so I think I'm good to go ahead and pull a vacuum for about 45 minutes. I'll open these back up. And I'll leave the vacuum pump running for about 30 to 45 minutes to pull a vacuum, make sure it evacuates any moisture in the system. At that point, I'll turn it off, let it sit for about another half hour to 45 minutes just to double check that there are no leaks. And once that's done, I can go ahead and fill the refrigerant. Alright, so last night I pulled a vacuum for a little over an hour. I let it sit for an hour and then checked the pressures, and I even let it sit overnight, so I'm confident that there's no leaks. A couple of things I'll say about this process. First is that I put a towel underneath this vacuum pump. You crack open this exhaust and then moisture comes out. It's mostly vacuum pump oil condensation, but it creates kind of a mess when you run this thing for an hour, so I just put a cardboard box under the pump and then put a towel on top of it. The other thing I want to talk about is this valve here. I will link this in the description, but this is really helpful for this part of the process as well as filling the refrigerant. It's pretty cheap and I would definitely recommend getting one of those to add to your manifold gauge set. But at this point I can go ahead and add refrigerant, so I'm going to grab my cans, I'm going to start the truck, and then I'll hook the cans up and get it charged. To fill the refrigerant, I've got 3 cans, which is about as much as this truck calls for. These are 12 ounces a piece, and this system calls for anywhere from 32 to 36 ounces, depending on where you get your information from. I'm gonna try 32, so I'm gonna do 2 cans and then leave about 4 ounces left in 1 can. To figure out how much is left in the last can, I'm gonna use this kitchen scale. I'm also gonna put some UV dye in it in case it ever gets a leak in the future. I'll be able to diagnose it. And the cans nowadays are self-sealing, so you have to get an adapter for your tap. They make taps that don't need this plastic adapter, but this is a tap for the old cans that it actually had to pierce through. So you may or may not need one of those adapters, but I'll link all this in the description. I'll start by threading the adapter onto the can, make sure it's tight. I'll run the tap all the way down, but if you have a tap that doesn't use an adapter, you may actually have to run it all the way up. I'll point this nozzle away from me as I thread the adapter onto the tap. Make sure this is good and tight. And then I want to get some of this UV dye into the line before I start charging refrigerant. Since my gauge set still has a vacuum, which I want to keep it that way, I don't want any air in it. I can put this UV dye into the tap before I connect the yellow line. I just use one of the straws that comes with your cans of WD-40 and PB Blaster. I'll get some of this dye into the straw, and then I can drop it in a little bit at a time into the tap. And that way I can keep a vacuum on my lines, but still get some UV dye in there. And I'll have to clean up my tap after I'm done. But this is the best way I've found to get UV dye in the system while still keeping a vacuum on your lines. You can also just dump some of this in one of the lines, but then you're going to open it up and get air in there. So this is the best way to keep a vacuum but still get some of this in there. So that looks pretty full. I'm going to stop there for now. I can always add more later if I want to, but now I can go ahead and thread the yellow line onto my tap. I'm leaving the valve on the end of this yellow line closed the whole time, so it still has a vacuum in this yellow line. So I'll tighten this down, clean up the extra dye off the tap, make sure I close this so I don't spill UV dye all over my truck. And now I've got everything set up to charge refrigerant properly. So I'll start the truck, turn on the AC. I'm gonna turn it on full blast, max AC with the recirculation button on. Then I'm gonna come out and release these valves one at a time to start putting refrigerant through the system. I should mention I've got the dials on my manifold gauge set closed. When I enter refrigerant in the system, I'm just gonna open the low side. So I'm gonna keep the high side closed the whole time. But with the vacuum still on the system, it's gonna do 2 things. It's gonna prevent ambient air from getting in the system, and it's also gonna pull refrigerant from the can faster, since in the beginning the compressor isn't running to pull that refrigerant in. So I'll start the truck and we'll charge it up. Ambient air temperature is about 72 degrees. I've got the AC set to full blast, and my initial temperature is the same as the ambient air. So I'll start by opening the can. If you listen, you can usually hear a hiss when this opens up. So I'll back that out all the way. I'll release this valve. And I should mention, you want to make sure your lines are out of the way of the belt and any moving parts inside the engine. So now I can go ahead and open the low side. The can will start to get cold, that way you know that you've got refrigerant flowing through. And now we wait for the compressor to start cycling. I'll know it's engaged when this clutch on the front starts spinning. So I can see the pressures are starting to climb. That means we're getting refrigerant in there. The can is getting cold, so I know it's coming out. And so now we just wait until that can is empty and it's completely warm from top to bottom. As the refrigerant comes out of the can, the top of the can will get warm, but the bottom will stay cold. So you'll be able to tell how much refrigerant has come out of the can just by feeling it. And the pressures are still climbing, so we're good. I'm gonna just empty this whole can in, and then I'll switch cans and do the same for all 3, leaving about 4 ounces in the last can. I'm up just above 40, so this should engage any second. All right, and there we go. We've got engagement, so now it's gonna cycle through those pretty quickly, but it's gonna pull refrigerant in quicker as well. I try to wipe the can off every once in a while to speed it up a little bit, but this just takes time. So we know our compressor works, which is good news. All right, and there it engaged again for a little bit. So while it's not engaged, the pressures are the same on both sides. And then as it engages, the low side drops down. It cuts off and then builds pressure again and does the same thing over and over. The time between cycles will start to get shorter and the cycles will last just a little bit longer. As the compressor engages quicker, it also pulls in refrigerant quicker as well. So it takes a little time in the beginning, but as you get more refrigerant in, it goes quicker. And that cycling tells us that all of our pressure switches are working correctly. So at this point, it'll just be a matter of getting the right amount of refrigerant into the system. These cans get pretty cold, and once you get to about half a can, you can tilt it back and forth to try to dissipate some of the heat. That'll make it charge a little faster. So now it's cycling pretty good. We should be pulling a lot more refrigerant into the system a lot quicker. So I'll let it get this can empty, and then I'll attach a second can. All right, and the first can is almost done. The compressor is engaged continuously, and at this point, it doesn't feel very cold, even on the bottom. And I can tilt it side to side and I don't feel anything cold down here, so I feel like this one is empty. My pressures are already reading pretty good even after just one can. And my little cheapo vent dial is already showing that it's down to about 50 degrees. So that's great news. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to the second can. I put the can down right next to the engine for a little bit, just to make sure that if you feel any cold, then you'll definitely tell where it's at. But this can's hot, so it is empty. The first thing I'll do is close this valve. I'll run this all the way down, and then I can remove this port from the tap. You wanna keep this pointed away from you in case there is any refrigerant left in there. It's also a good idea to go ahead and close the low side just in case you forgot one of those steps. And so now I'll take the adapter off the can. A little bit of hissing, but nothing really, so this is definitely empty. I'm gonna go ahead and measure the weight of the can, and it's 3.5 grams. So when I finish the second one, I'm gonna weigh that too. If both cans are 3.5 grams, then I know how much refrigerant I need to have left in the third can. I'll just add 4 ounces to 3.5, so I should end up with a 7.5 ounce can. So I'll go ahead and take the adapter off the tap. I'll run this tap back out. I'll put the adapter on the second can. I'm gonna make sure I point the nozzle away from me just in case it releases any refrigerant. Tighten it down. I'll add some more UV dye into the tap. Might even be better to try a bigger straw. I'll get the tap threaded on to the adapter. I'll run this back down to close it off. Point the nozzle away from me. I'll thread the yellow line onto the tap. Make sure that's tight. I'll run this back out. Open this valve, and then I'll open the low side port back up, and I'll do the same thing for this can. While you're waiting, it's a good time to check the level of the transmission fluid. I added about half a quart, and mine's good now. And you can also clean up any AC juice that you sprayed in the engine bay because you missed some of those steps. Not that I've ever done that. All right, now I'm about 1.5 cans in, and it is already cold in the cab. My little cheapo dial is getting down to the green area, and I've got about a 30 to 35 degree temperature drop from the ambient temperature, which is about as good as I hope to get with the system full. So I may just finish the second can and then leave it, and if it ever feels like it's not cold enough, I can always dump in an extra half a can. Pressures are still good. The high side's not too high and the low side is a little bit low, but like I said, it is cooling good enough that I might just leave 2 cans in it. The second can's getting close to empty. This one dumped in way faster than the first can did. The only thing I wish was different is I wish I got a little bit more UV dye in there. I just don't like opening up that line to dump it in there. I'd rather have a vacuumed out line to hook the cans up to. So I don't know, you guys tell me, do you have a better method for getting UV dye into the system? My pressures are looking pretty good. I've got 30 on the low side and about 150 on the high side. So that's getting close, even with only 2 cans in there. I will put up a chart that I always use that shows you what the ambient temperature is, and then it shows you what the low side and the high side should be reading with those ambient temperatures. An optimal system will drop the temperature inside the cab about 40 degrees from the outside temperature. It's about 80 degrees here right now, so the best I'm hoping for is about 40 degrees inside the cab. And according to my cheapo dial, we are almost there. So I will call that good enough. I am gonna go ahead and just finish up with the second can. I'm happy with that, and then later this summer, if it gets hotter and I feel like it's not quite cold enough, I can always dump in another half a can. All right, so the second can is warm. It's not even cold on the bottom, so this is empty. I'll go ahead and close this valve. I can remove this adapter from the tap. And with 2 cans in the system, let's check the temperature inside the cab. All right, so this says we're just above 40 degrees, which is great. I can double check and see that we've got 43 degrees coming out of the vents. Like I said, that's about as good as I hope to get, so I am super happy with this. I'm just gonna leave it as is. That process took a while, but it is totally worth it to have ice cold AC in this truck. So now I'll go ahead and close off the low side. I can close these ports too. I can get these off the ports. Before I take the high port off, there is still pressure in the manifold gauges. I want to release that pressure, so I'm going to open this valve. And with that open, I can open these up, and that'll remove that pressure from the gauges. I'll let that get down to 0, and then I'll close these back up. And with that, I am super excited that I finally have cold AC in this truck. So it's a good idea to dedicate an old towel to cleaning up all the stuff that you have in a project like this. I got some UV dye on it. I soaked up some oil from my vacuum pump, and I can use it to clean up things like my adapter so I can reuse this later. Just a good idea so you don't spill any of this stuff on your truck. Here's a quick look at all of the parts and tools that I used. I will link all of this in the description, including the kit that I got that came with the compressor, accumulator, orifice tube, seals, and PAG oil. I like that it came with PAG oil. I'm going to dump the rest of that into the old compressor and then keep it just in case they ever stop manufacturing these. But with that, like I said, I am super happy to have cold AC in this truck. Thanks so much guys for watching. Drop a comment, let me know how your project goes. Subscribe if you haven't already for more OBS Chevy content. Thanks again for watching, and I will catch you guys in the next video.